Hello, my name is Dawn Waters, and this is my cultural identity storyboard. Social identity is the part of someone's self-concept that is based on their perceived membership in a group or groups. Race, gender, ethnicity, age, role, sexual orientation are just a few pieces of the social identity puzzle. Who am I is a question that allows us to have unique answers. I'm a white, female, lesbian mother, professional who is spiritually agnostic. For each group, there are subgroups or categories which further explain who, as well as how, I identify myself in everyday life. I'm a feminist, an LGBTQ advocate, who is a writer and real estate broker that also mentors youth and is a guardian ad litem. Identification with groups is not a static process. Social identity is fluid and varies as people change and move through life. For example, at one point in my life, I was heterosexual, Catholic, and a wellness coach. Belonging to a group helps create unity within groups, but it can also create stress. If I could keep only one aspect of my social identity, I would choose being a mom. For the past 23 years, this aspect has been the most important to me and has brought the most growth to my life personally. I wouldn't give that up for anything. To get a picture of social identity theory and its impact on behavior, three processes are involved. The first process, called social categorization, happens when we organize individuals into social groups to understand our social world. We define ourselves and others based on the groups we belong to and have the tendency to define people based on their categories more often than their individual characteristics. Usually the similarities and differences of those in the same group is the emphasis with social categorization. The second process is called social identification, and that is how you identify as a group member. Socially identifying with a group leads people to act the way they believe members of the group should behave. Through this process, people become aware and emotionally invested in their group memberships, and their self-esteem is positively affected. The third process, which is social comparison, is when people compare their group to other groups with relation to their social standing or prestige. To increase self-esteem, someone has to view their group as having a higher social standing than an out-group. Prejudice, power, and privilege are common precepts reserved for non-minorities and usually white individuals. The racist history of the United States is embedded in American culture and began when the Native American and First Nation peoples were kicked off their land by the early settlers. Slavery continued the marginalization and dismissal of Africans when they were brought at the whim of white Euro colonists. Social justice reform has been a painfully slow process because of monocultural ethnocentrism, which means one culture, one race, is more important than others. Many in the white community have refused to acknowledge the economic, educational, and healthcare inequity present in the African American community. The pandemic has also shined a light on the lack of healthcare present in the African American communities and the immediate negative impact on employment and income. Black families do not have access to the same healthcare medical providers than most people. Criminal justice system also is an area that seriously needs to be considered and looked at in order to improve upon and make more equality for people of color. Despite civil rights bills and a renewed interest in creating meaningful social policy reforms, the status quo of racism has remained intact. The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota in May of 2020 shifted the eyes of the world away from the status quo and launched a loud plea for change. The white individuals have finally been forced to decide and look at their part in fostering and promulgating racist patterns. White racial identity development theory shows that healthy white identity requires 6 steps. Abandonment of racism begins when a person moves through the contact, disintegration, and reintegration status. The first tier includes dismissing the existence of differences, then their mindset shifts to invalidations, and then there's an emergence of white superiority as kind of a coping mechanism to make sense of the inability to believe that there's actually problems. Defining a non-racist white identity moves the person through a process of recognizing the existence of unfair practices and usually comes about as a result of a dramatic event or some kind of trauma, like George Floyd and the police brutality he suffered. The next step is then a realization of personal bias, which needs to be addressed, which is immersion, and then ends with the decision to no longer perpetuate racism and to educate themselves about becoming a non-racist, which is the autonomy phase. Cultural competence in social work is a combination of practices, engagements, and commitments to become educated and aware of the differences among individuals, groups, and society. The Council on Social Work Education clearly states the competencies social workers must adopt and strive to achieve to be successful in their helping role, which includes things such as engaging in diversity, advancing human rights, social, economic, and environmental justice, fostering systemic change, engaging in policy practices, and understanding the impact of privilege, intersectionality, and multicultural differences. In addition to the long list of isms, cultural competency means as a social worker, cultural differences are accepted, appreciated, and accommodated while working within the scope of social work. The personal commitment to growth and continual education is a requisite skill for those who hope to enact social change on a micro, meso, and macro level. There are so many individuals that we have to seriously be aware of all of the differences that are out there and not just focus on our own limited experience in the world. Much like my social identity, social work is not fixed or an immovable field of study. It's fluid, dynamic, and rapidly adjusts to changes in society and the need for social justice within all cultures. This course has taught me the importance of self-evaluation and belief systems. As a white lesbian female, my privilege is sometimes buried beneath the intersections of my identity. Learning to step back and check in with my own ingrained beliefs, which do not serve the underserved or marginalized communities, is a valuable lesson. Being committed to learning more about culturally diverse worldviews and making choices that will help reduce prejudice in my daily living is a definite tool that this course helped me learn. Realizing that there are many aspects to becoming an effective and culturally competent social worker includes adopting my own personal creed of evaluating, educating, and eradicating. This mentality has been the biggest takeaway so far, and I know it will serve me well as I begin my practice.